some of the basic issues which we face in patient care. And the usual problems or usual communication issues which we face are when we are told to communicate a bad news to a patient. We are not sure what to do. Can I tell suddenly to the patient, or how can I go about it? Can I do it better in a better way? And many a times the family members don't want us to communicate the bad news to the patient. So can we go against the wish of the patient family, or uh, shall we go along with the patient? So there are many areas which we need to have clarity. And another common situation is angry patient or caregiver with medical professionals or with our other staffs. So can we do anything, or shall we run away from this situation? So let's hear from Dr. Bijuragan about how to manage these situations. So Dr. Bijuragan, all of you know him, but still for the sake of formality, Dr. Bijuragan is the consultant in pain and palliative medicine at Rajagiri Hospital, Aliva in Kerala. And he has done his postgraduate diploma in pain and palliative medicine way back in 2004-5. And he has been working in palliative care till then. And we have been working together since 2004. So, Bijo, it's over to you.
Thank you, Sunil. Again, quite a pleasure joining you and others in Pallium India, and welcoming all the delegates who have joined in. We have a lot to cover, so let us start straight away. If Rajlakshmi would kindly start sharing the screen. All right. So next slide, please. So today is part 2 of communication skills training program. Part 1 was last week. Today we'll be covering how to communicate bad news. We'll try to see how to manage collusion, and we'll also deal with an angry person. Next slide, please. So essentially, all over the world, how people communicate bad news to the patient. Please, I'm putting the emphasis on the word patient. We are not talking about family. How people communicate bad news to the patient is either of these two models. Either they tell everything to the patient, or they do not tell to the patient. So either it's a full disclosure model or a non-disclosure model. The problem with both these models is it goes into conflict with what the patient wants. Next slide. And what the patient wants could be either the patient wants to know or the patient doesn't want to know. And both are patient's right. The patient has the right to know, the patient has the right not to know. So if we have a full disclosure model, that is, we tell it everything to the patient, but the patient does not want to know, that becomes a conflict. Or if we are practicing non-disclosure model, that is, we do not tell it to the patient, but the patient wants to know, that also becomes a model. So it is important to tailor make a model for each individual. And that would be an individualized disclosure model. Next slide, please. So that is next slide. So the individualized disclosure model is keeping in mind what does the patient want, whether the patient wants to know or does not want to know. So those who do not want to know, we will not force information on those patients. And those who want to know, only those patients we will be conveying the information. The second point is those who want to know, we will give them information only as much as they want to know, not less information, not more information, just the optimum information that the patient wants. So the trick is in trying to figure out who wants to know, who doesn't want to know. And once we have figured that out, then the next challenge is how to give information to the optimum content, to the optimum volume, not less, not more. Next slide, please. So before we go on to that, we have to find out who should communicate bad news. It is simple. The whoever is communicating bad news must have the trust of the patient. The patient should be able to trust the person. Only then the person will believe the person. The second important part is information. The person should know what is the disease, what is the, not in technical medical jargon, but essentially the person should know that it is a disease and whether it is curable, incurable, or advanced stage or end stage, whatever, in simple language. And then what can be done and what cannot be done. So it is very important that the person should have information. And yes, the most important part is the skill to convey bad news. It is, after all, a very painful experience of conveying as well as listening to bad news. So, how we are going to do it in a sensitive, empathetic manner, in an optimum manner, all of that or involves skill. And skill is something that we need to learn. Next slide, please. So why should we communicate bad news? There are a couple of reasons. One is closure of life's business. That means we get a chance, once we know that our mortality is right in front of us, we will seriously consider the things to be done before we die. It could be related to settling of our property, will, bank account, password, or it could be related to our personal relationship, just telling somebody I love you so much, or telling them that I forgive you, or asking for forgiveness. So a lot of the chance to make a relationship better. It's also a chance to do things that you always wanted to do but never got around to doing it, just like a bucket list. As long as your body and mind allows it, you can do a lot of things before you become incapacitated. So that is why if you get to know what is wrong with you, you get a chance to finish a lot of things in your life. The other thing is hospital hopping and doctor shopping. What happens is when people don't know what is going on, their expectation and their reality is totally mismatched. It's not the patient's fault that the patient expects to get better, because nobody told the patient that their disease is so and so condition. And as a result, what happens is when their expectation does not match with the treatment or the care that they're receiving, it may be a very good treatment, but their expectation is way above realistic situation, and as a result, they will lose faith in the treatment that is being given because it is not reaching up to their expectation. Naturally, they will go to some other hospital, other doctor, and there also the after some time they will have the same problem. They will go to a third hospital, and it just keeps on hopping from one hospital to the other, going from one doctor to the other. And as a result, they will be spending so much of money, effort, energy, resources, all for futile effort. It all becomes futile. So only if they knew that there is no need for it, they wouldn't be hospital hopping and doctor shopping. The third important part is the barrier between the patient and family. Many times when the patient has not been told the truth, the family is compelled to act in front of the patient. In front of the patient, they put on a smile and a pretense of normality. However, once they get overwhelmed, they may go to the next room or to the next house and cry. They may go to the relative's house and cry. They may come to your office, and they will cry over there because in front of the patient, they cannot. So what happens to the relationship? It becomes a farce. It is not a real relationship. A real relationship would have been if the patient and family could both hug and cry and tell each other how much they value each other. Because it is so little of time left. It may be days or weeks or months, but that is precious time. And the precious time is wasted in play acting, pretending everything is normal. So, and only once the person dies, then when you look back, so then you realize, oh, all those days, only if we could have spoken some genuine words to each other. But that opportunity is lost. Total care is about physical, emotional, social, spiritual care. In palliative care, we talk about total care. So if the patient does not know, how are you ever going to provide total care? You can at best be doing some physical symptom control. But if the patient does not know and the family does not allow you to be honest with the patient, you cannot go into the depths of the patient's psyche, explore their concerns, fears, and have a very honest conversation and ventilation of emotion. None of this is going to happen. So that is why it is important to communicate bad news. There's a lot of benefit out of it. But please remember, only to those who want to know, and only as much as they want to. Next slide, please. So all over the world, the standard operating procedure of communicating bad news is the SPIKES protocol. SPIKES stands for setting up the interview. You have to create the right kind of atmosphere. For example, in my case, I always keep aside the evening time when all the rush in the OP is over and it is quite calm and less noisy in the OP area. That's a good time for that. Whenever I have to do a CBN, communicating bad news, I prefer to do it at that time. It's not necessary that I only do it at that time, but I prefer a quiet time of the day. Plus, I will be having some water to drink and some tissues handy because we expect emotions in this kind of settings. Then we have to find the patient's perception, or what is the patient's insight, or what is the patient's understanding about what is going on. And then we invite the patient for a discussion. So that invitation is sent out, and if the patient takes the invitation, only then we proceed. And there's a method of doing that. And then, of course, the sharing of knowledge in an honest and easy to understand manner. And once that is done, expect emotions, and we have to allow ventilation of emotions. And once the emotions are drained out, then we can talk about what can be done, what can't be done, and how to go about it. And that's how we will finish the interview. Please remember our History 2.0, the structured interview that we talked about last time. Next slide, please. So communicating bad news is like a procedure, and just like any other surgical procedure, there is an indication, there is a standard operating procedure, and there is an expected outcome, and there is a follow-up plan for it. So next slide. So procedure preparation, go through the medical documents, prepare yourself. Even if you have been the regular doctor for this patient, it is always good to just go through the documents, because sometimes the patient may come up with some questions. So it's good to know what all is going on. And as I said earlier, have a dedicated time for this. It is like a surgical procedure. You need to focus time on it. You can't be multitasking while communicating bad news. Set the environment and use active listening skills. Last time we talked about, during the previous session, we talked about active listening skills. So I hope you remember all of that. Next slide, please. So when you start the interview, you take the patient's history. Either it's the first visit or subsequent visits. And when you are taking the patient's history, always try to find out the patient's insight as to what does the patient understand. It just involves asking more questions. For example, if the patient was advised an X-ray, and then you ask, so what did the X-ray show? And then the patient may say that the doctor didn't say anything. The doctor gave me a referral letter to the city hospital. So why did the doctor refer you to the city hospital? I guess maybe because for further treatment was not possible in the local hospital. Okay. And then what happened in the city hospital? They asked me to get a CT scan. And why did they ask you to get a CT scan? I don't know. They said that I have to get a CT scan. The doctor said that's why I did. Okay. So then what was the result of the CT scan? They said something I couldn't understand what they said. Okay. And then what happened? They asked me to get a biopsy. Why did they ask you to get a biopsy? Oh, I don't know. They just asked me to get a biopsy and I got the biopsy. And what was the result of the biopsy? And they said that they are giving a reference letter uh, to you and with all the reports. So that is all that I know. So when you are digging for your patient's understanding, you'll realize that they know a little bit. There are a lot of blank spots. They don't know a lot of things. And plus, they may have a lot of assumptions on what is going on. The assumption may be true, maybe partially true, or maybe totally wrong. But for you, it is important to understand that while you're getting the history, it is also important to parallelly find out what the patient understands. That just involves asking more questions. That's all. So once you have the patient's history and then you have the patient's insight, and then you can explore whether you want to know more. Sometimes the patient may ask themselves, what is wrong with me? I mean, nobody is telling anything. What is wrong with me? Can you tell me what is going on? Or you can stimulate the question. Do you want to know what is going on? Do you want to know anything about your disease? Something like that. And if they say yes, then you have to give a warning shot. You do not straight away tell the bad news to the patient. You first give a warning shot. Next slide. A warning shot is something like, if it is something serious, would you still want to know? If it is something serious, would you still want to know? So this is how this it is warning shot is constructed. There is two parts to it. If it is something serious, the second part is, would you still want to know? So you have to figure out how you are going to convert this into your local language and structure it in these two parts. The reason why we give a warning shot is because till this point, the environment of the interview has been like any normal interview. But the moment you give a warning shot, it becomes a serious environment. And the patient realizes that something serious is afoot. And then the patient can decide whether I want to listen to this or not. If the patient does not make eye contact, or if the patient gives an excuse, for example, you give me my medicines, I'll come back after 1 week. Or if the patient tells you, no, I don't want to tell it to my children or tell it to my spouse, that means this person is not mentally prepared to hear a bad news. However, if this person looks you into your eyes and says, yes, I want to know, that is, this person makes eye contact and says, yes, I want to know, then there is no confusion. Here is a person in front of you who really wants to know. Only to such a person will you convey bad news. Otherwise, you will not proceed with conveying bad news because the other person is not mentally prepared for it. So we do not want to harm this person by forcing information. You will give information only to somebody who is mentally prepared to listen to it. And that is what the warning shot helps you find out about the person in front of you. Next slide. And once you have you have figured out the person in front of you, whether the person wants to know or not, then you do not straight away tell the bad news. You tell a story. Next slide. And the storytelling is called a narrative approach. And the narrative of the story is of the patient to the patient from the beginning. For example, the story I just talked about, this patient went to the local doctor with some cough and weight loss, and the doctor initially treated for 1 week with some antibiotics and vitamins and did not get better. And then the person asked for a chest x-ray. The doctor asked for a chest x-ray and then referred the patient to the higher center. And from there, they did a CT scan and a biopsy. And then they finally found that the disease was a malignancy. And the patient's insight is what I had discussed earlier. I don't know why the chest x-ray was done. And they sent me to the city hospital for better treatment. I don't know why the CT scan was done. I don't know the result of the CT scan. I don't know why they did a biopsy. I don't know this. I do not know the result of the biopsy. I don't know why I've been referred here. I assume for better treatment. So this is the patient's insight. You know the patient's story. You know the medical story. You know the patient's history, and now you know the patient's insight. So once you know this, then you tell the patient's story to the patient from the beginning by saying, and while you are narrating the story, you fill in the blanks. You go on filling in the blanks. For example, the X-ray showed something like a shadow. And to find out what the shadow was, they referred you to the city hospital. In the city hospital, they did a CT scan. The CT scan showed something like a tumor. Next slide, please. And to find out what this tumor was, they did a biopsy. The biopsy showed something like a cancer. So every time you are filling in the blanks, you're also escalating the information. For example, the first information was something like a shadow in the X-ray. So something like a shadow becomes shadow in the next sentence. They found something like a shadow in the X-ray, and to find out what this shadow was, they referred you to the city hospital. So something like a shadow becomes a shadow. In the city hospital, they got a CT scan done, and they found something like a tumor. And the something like a tumor escalates into a tumor in the next sentence. The CT scan showed something like a tumor, and to find out what this tumor was, they decided to get a biopsy done. And the biopsy showed something like a cancer. So at this point of time, probably the patient will say, do I have cancer? At that point of time, you can just say, yes, I'm sorry. So it is gradual filling when you are telling the story of the patient from the beginning. You fill in the blanks as you go along the story, and along the way, you gradually escalate the information in small increments. Something like a shadow becomes a shadow becomes something like a tumor, something like a tumor becomes a tumor becomes something like a cancer. So the advantage is that at any point of time, if the patient had enough information, the patient will stop making eye contact. And if the patient is not making eye contact, you pause the story over there, because it is possible that patient is processing this new information, is digesting this new information. And if the patient has digested this new information and wants more information, the person will again make eye contact, and then you can proceed. Next slide. However, it is also possible that the patient had enough of information and is not making eye contact. So now we are confused whether the patient is just sitting there quietly, not looking at you. You're also not very sure what to do. In this kind of situation, you can probe. Do you want me to proceed? Do you want to know more? You can ask something like that. If the person does not make eye contact, or at this point of time makes an excuse, give me some medicines, I'll come after 1 week, or tells you, no, I had enough, I don't want to know more. Any of this, that means the patient does not want to know more. You stop the storytelling at this point of time. It is possible that the patient may come up later and ask you more information, but for the time being, the patient had enough. This is how you find out how much information you should be giving at any given point of time. And it's also possible that the person may be sitting and listening to the entire information, because there might be people who want to listen to the whole thing. So either you finish the story, or you stop at the point where the patient does not want to proceed further. So that is how we find out what is the optimum dose of information for that particular patient. Now, whether you have finished the story or you are halfway and you have to stop, be prepared for an emotional reaction. Emotional reaction can be in the form of tears, or it can be anger, it could be anything, but it is emotional reaction. And for emotional reaction, what you have to do is don't do anything. Next slide. Just be there. Just be there with the person till the person finishes ventilating the emotion. For those who are not trained with this kind of activity, it may feel very, very uncomfortable sitting next to a patient who is crying and not saying anything, not doing anything. It is very important you give time to the person to allow the person to ventilate emotion. At best, you can offer a tissue or offer a glass of water, but do not force a glass of water. Do not force a tissue, because that can also prevent further ventilation of emotion. You can just put it on the table near to the person and let the person choose whether the person wants to use it or not. Do not force it. The most important part is be there. Allow the person to ventilate. Most of us who are not trained in this aspects of our medical training will find this very difficult. But remember, it is very, very crucial. It's a very, very important part of the procedure. Just like a surgeon, if there is a bleeder, will put a pressure on the bleeder and have to wait till the the bleeding stops. It is something similar like that. You need to take a pause at this point of time. Next slide, please. So once emotional reaction has subsided, then perhaps the patient may ask a few questions, and whatever the questions may be, you try to give as honest answer as you possibly can. It's possible that they may ask questions to which you don't have answer. For example, why did God do this to me? You are unlikely to have a clear-cut answer to that. If you don't know an answer, just stay quiet, or you can say, I really don't know. And in case your opinion is being sought on certain kind of treatment and you have an opinion about that, you do give that opinion. And once all this information sharing is being done, then you have to plan how you're going to proceed. So there again, you have to make a decision by consensus. You give your suggestion, you hear their suggestion, so the family is also involved. So together we take a decision by consensus. Next slide. And once the decision has been taken, you proceed with it. In between, I just want to emphasize, do not give false hopes. It may be very, very tempting to pat them on the shoulder and say, don't worry, everything will be all right. We are there with you. Don't worry, don't worry. Don't say anything of that. Those words are cheap. It does not have value. It's very important to do not give false hopes, but there is always an achievable hope that you can give. There is always an achievable hope, a realistic hope that you can give. And that is what you should be practicing, something that you can deliver. Something that you can't deliver, do not. And do not assume what their concerns are. Ask for their concerns. Next slide, please. Just like our previous session, we closed the interview by asking if there's anything else that they want to know. And then we closed the interview by leaving the door open. Leaving the door open means they always have access to us, not our personal number, but at least some contact number in case they want to reach out to us. So I think that's about it. And next is post-procedure follow-up. Next slide. So post-procedure follow-up, if the patient is IP, then maybe before you go home, you can drop in and see how they are doing. Or you can arrange one of your team members, a social worker or a nurse, somebody to drop in and see the person, how they are doing. If the patient was seen on an OP basis, if the communicating bad news was an OP procedure, then arrange somebody to call them at home in the late evening just to see how they are doing. It is just a good practice to do a post-procedure follow-up. Next slide, please. So that's where we are stopping as far as communicating bad news is concerned. CBN, if you have any questions, please put it up in the chat. We will go on to the next topic. Collusion. Collusion is essentially a conspiracy of silence, where usually the family member come to us and says, please do not tell to the patient. And most of us are fairly familiar with
Rajalakshmi,
this.
somebody unmuted. There is a background noise.
Sir, it is a background news from Biju Raghavan, sir.
Okay.
I'm sorry, there is a overhead announcement about
Okay.
Corona. Sorry about that. Yeah. I really can't do much about it, but that was it. Anyway, so where the family members comes to us and says, please do not tell it to the patient. So that is conspiracy of silence, that the family would like to uh, engage with us. Now, why does this happen? Next slide. Because the family is trying to protect their loved ones, because they perceive that if the loved one hears the bad news, it will harm them, and they are, and the source of bad news is us. The loved one is likely to hear the bad news from us, the medical professionals. That is why the family comes to us and says, please do not tell it to the patient, because they are trying to protect their loved one. Next slide. So most important, we have to understand that here is a situation where you have to forget the patient and focus on the family. Please understand, the family is also suffering. They are very anxious. They are scared. So you have to understand, you have to acknowledge that the family is suffering. The family is anxious. Only then we will be able to proceed further. Because until unless we don't acknowledge that the family is scared, our attitude towards them will not be as empathetic as is needed. Next slide. So what you need to do is do not challenge the family's belief. From your point of view, you may have your reasons, but if the family believes that the moment you tell the bad news to the patient is going to drop dead, it is their belief and they firmly believe in it. So mocking them or minimizing their belief, saying, "Oh, this is nothing. You are, don't believe like that." That kind of attitude is not going to help. It is only going to make the family more anxious, and hence, do not challenge their beliefs. Next slide. So what you need to do is agree to collude. Surprise, surprise. I'm telling you to collude with them. But remember, it is only part one. Part one. Because when you agree that, okay, no problem, I will not tell the patient, then their anxiety comes down. Because it is very important to bring down the anxiety of the family. And by agreeing to what they want, you bring down the anxiety. In fact, in my practice, I also ask them, so what have you told the patient? And then they tell me whatever they have told. They may say, I told them it's an ulcer or whatever. Then I tell them, is it okay if I also say the same thing? So they are actually very happy. Not only they are relieved, they are happy that I am also on their side. Now, this is important because we have to build a relationship of trust with the family, because we cannot reach the patient without the family being on our side. And this is the starting point of earning that trust. And the next most important thing you can do to earn the family's trust is to make sure the patient is physically comfortable. Make sure the patient's pain is taken care of, breathlessness is taken care of, restlessness is taken care of, and the patient is happy, comfortable. You are going to score big with the family. The family is going to really trust you, and then they will start listening to you. So, first you listen to them, earn their trust, and then they will start listening to you. Next slide. So, listen, 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 earn the trust. Next slide. And once you have the trust of the family, then you can gradually orient or reorient the family towards the issues relating to hospital hopping, doctor shopping, a chance to finish life's business, and the barrier in relationships between patient and family. Because all of these things they would be facing at this point of time. So all the things that I talked to you about, why we should communicate bad news, which I told you, you can now talk to the family, but not in the first phase, only in the second phase when you have earned the trust of the family. And it is the more you practice it, you'll realize your ability to convert the family from pollution to agreeing to CBN improves. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of hard work and persistence. Please remember, it is possible that despite your best effort, you will fail to convince some families, but that is okay. Next slide. There is no shame in trying and failing. There is no shame in trying and failing. The only shame is in not trying. So when you see that the family, despite your best efforts, is not agreeing, do not push your agenda. It cannot be your agenda. It is only your suggestion that it will be good if the patient knew. So earn the trust and then try to reorient them towards the benefits of communicating bad news. The more skillful you become, your conversion rates improves. Initially in the early stages, it is not easy, but gradually, you will be able to convince more and more families. But despite if you are the most skillful communicator, does not guarantee success all the time. Many a times you have to be prepared for failure. But if you are not able to convince the family, at least what you can do is help out the patient in with little bit of comfort that you can possibly provide. You can't do everything, but at least you try and see what best possibly you can do. Next slide. And many a times we see anger in our clinical environment. So we'll talk a little bit about anger. We have to understand that anger is a high energy consuming negative emotion. That means a lot of energy is consumed in becoming angry and to maintaining that anger. A lot of energy is required. Essentially, anger and crying are two sides of the same coin, and the coin is emotional stress. When there is emotional stress, some people get angry, some people cry. So it is the two sides of the same coin. Emotional stress leads to anger or crying. So the idea is, how can we facilitate draining of this emotion in a non-confrontational, active manner? Next slide. So what we need to do is, we have the most important part is in the body language, because when somebody is very angry, there is so much of adrenaline that the angry person may not be able to sit down. So when the person is very angry, asking the person to calm down or sit down will only make the person more angry. So what you need to do is three things. First, you also stand up, because when you stand up, you make your body equal to the body position of the angry person. So you are creating a sense of equality, which is a positive body language. Then the next thing that you have to do is, you have to make eye contact. You don't smile, but you make eye contact. And when you make eye contact, what you are reflecting or showing that you are confident. Confidence is also a very positive body language. And then when you're standing, you stand with a little bit of kyphosis. That is, the little bit spine bent forward, little bit, just a little bit, not too much. So when you are standing with the spine bent a little forward, it shows respectful posture. It shows a respectful posture. So here you are demonstrating equality, confidence, and respect. These three body language postures will not cause confrontation and will facilitate the training out of the anger. And what you have to do is, while you are standing in a respectful, confident manner, and this person is shouting and getting very angry, you have to keep nodding your head in agreement. Basically, you are just allowing the emotion to ventilate out. You are not agreeing with what the person is saying, you're just nodding, because the nodding will help the person to ventilate more and more and faster and faster. And within a short period of time, you will realize the person starts becoming calm and the body starts relaxing a little bit. At this point of time, you can then open your mouth and say, sir, I want to know more about this problem. Can we sit down and talk? So at this point of time, you invite this person to have a further discussion while sitting down. And then the person will usually take up that invitation to sit down. And in the sitting posture, you continue facilitating ventilation of emotion. You just continue for the person to speak and talk more and more about whatever is what their issue was. So the more they talk, the more they ventilate, the more their anger comes down. Eventually, when most of that emotional stress has been ventilated, then it is possible that you don't have to do anything. The person just calms down and leaves. It's also possible that you may, during all this conversation, you may figure out a solution to this, why this person got angry, and you can offer that solution. Only if it is really indicated, only if it is really indicated that you need to put up an apology. Just because somebody is angry does not mean we automatically give an apology. So, because if you are giving an apology, it has to be a genuine apology, not for the sake of giving an apology. Because sake of giving an apology also makes somebody very angry or dissatisfied. So it's not necessary that you have to give an apology for every person who gets angry, only if it is really indicated based on the context and the situation. So in this way, usually we will be able to take care of most of the clinical anger we are dealing with in a day-to-day basis in our clinical practice. However, I want to caution, this is not to be used in presence of mob violence. Mob violence is a law and order problem. This is not to be used in the presence of somebody under the influence of alcohol or substance. That is also a law and order problem. We are not trained to deal with law and order problem. The best we can get trained is to deal with clinical stress management. And this is one of that situation. Naturally, you need to have a fair degree of communication skills under your belt to deal with anger, because anger is a communication emergency. Whereas communicating bad news or managing pollution are elective procedures. So I think I'll stop there. Is there any one more slide? I think, yeah. Okay, you have to take care of your anger also. It's possible that our day-to-day stress makes us angry. So the best way to manage your anger is to work out a buddy system. A buddy system means you can ask one of your colleagues, somebody with whom you are comfortable and very close, that to watch out if you are getting irritable, whether the tone of your voice, whether the pitch of your voice, whether your facial expression or the language that you are using is irritable language. Any sign of resentment, anger, negativity, anything that your buddy picks up, the person has to come and tell you, hey, this is how you're sounding, this is what you're saying. So this will give you a reality check, and it will give a chance for you to calm down, because you realize that you're getting irritated, and this will help you prevent blowing up in anger, because then it will be too late to correct the problem. So it is always, prevention is better than cure. So preventing from getting angry by detecting stress is the best way of managing your anger. You will need the help of your colleague. It is like a buddy system, and you help the person out similarly. That person also helps you out similarly. So it works to the benefit of both people. Naturally, you will have better peace of mind also, less stress. I think we'll stop there. We'll take questions now.
I saw one question in the chat box, but that question was already answered.
Okay.
In the pollution.
All right.
Are there any other questions?
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes, yes.
Dr. Kale from Nagpur.
Hello, sir.
Sometimes
Yes.
we are confronted with the patient and family, they come, then they sit separately, and then patient suddenly comes and asks directly on the face, doctor, tell me whether I have cancer, yes or no. How do we deal with this?
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah. We often find ourselves in a bit
This
of a
situation.
fix when the patient is demanding to know and the family is not allowing us to tell. So it is a bit of a tricky problem. One thing that we can try is to tell the patient that you need more information and you need more time to figure out. And so you buy some time. So you're not telling a total lie to the patient that oh, there is nothing wrong with you or something. And neither you're saying the truth without the permission of the family. So you buy some time by saying something like that. I need more time to study the reports. I need more time to find out. Meanwhile, you will try to open up the channel of communication with the family and see how you are able to manage pollution.
Sorry to interrupt you, but then, sir, what happens? Everything, all reports are with you, all file here, and then he can counter question you. You have already seen everything is written, and still you are trying to avoid my answer. You tell me only one way. I have cancer. I have no cancer. That's all. That
Sir,
is how I am
understood.
confronted. Yes.
Understood. I cannot guide you on
Yes.
a patient to patient basis. I'm just
Yes.
telling
Yes.
you the broad
Overall.
guidelines of
Yes.
how we will go about it. If the
Yes.
person says you have all the report, then
Yes.
what is your problem? I may say I need to consult with some of my colleagues. I need to
Uh-huh.
discuss this report. It is you have
No,
to
to
innovate
divert
on the
somewhere.
spot. You have to
Divert.
innovate on the spot and figure out. You have to buy time for yourself so that you can work with the family, and it is possible despite the best effort the family does not agree and the patient insists on this thing. And if I am confronted with that kind of situation, then I'll tell the family, look, he is asking me, you help me, what should I do? You find out a solution for me. Instead of me giving you a solution, I tell ask the family, you tell me what should I do, and let them figure out what is to be
Right.
done. it,
Thank you.
it is a partnership. It's a partnership in real sense.
Yes, thank you.
So I have one question. If the family members, even after suggesting they are not willing to disclose the diagnosis to the patient, so how should we proceed then?
As I said, it is like you have to work with your hand tied behind your back. So the family does not agree. So, and if the patient is not insisting on knowing, at least what you can make sure is that you can provide physical comfort. You can make sure that the patient is pain free, is sleeping well, is having good bowel movements, physically and mentally comfortable, and having some peace of mind. There are a lot of things you can still do. The communicating bad news is not the be all and end all of care. It is desirable if people know, if they want to know. It is not mandatory that they have to know. As doctors, it cannot be our agenda to communicate bad news to the patient. We are only facilitators of information.
Thank you, sir.
We should give preference to the family's concern and belief, or we should give preference to the patient?
That depends on which country you're working in.
So
In India, patient's autonomy doesn't count for much. It is the family's right over the patient, which is way above the patient's autonomy. In our culture, individual liberty and freedom is of not much value. It is the family and the community and the society which has more value than individuals. So if you are working in
I think
India, you have to listen to the family.
It will also change from patient to patient, their socioeconomic class, and so many other things.
At individual level, there will be variations, but as a cultural entity, most of the Oriental cultures, we have less importance on patient autonomy. It is more of the in the Occidental culture, that is the Western culture, individual liberty and individual freedom and autonomy are sacred cow. It is non-negotiable. In our culture, individual is not important. So that's why I said, where you if you're working in India or Asian countries, then we have to uh, we are forced to get the green flag from the family before you can move on to the patient.
So we can discuss with the family that whether we should pass on the information to the patient or not, or we
Sorry,
should not.
I didn't get the question.
Should we discuss with the patient's family that whether we should give the information to the patient, or we are not supposed to give any guiding questions towards informing the patient?
See, whether you are going to be given access to the patient depends on the family, right? It is the family which brings the patient to you. In our culture, it is not the patient who decides, I'm going to come and meet you. It is the family which brings the patient to the hospital, to the doctor. So naturally, you will be communicating everything to the family. The point is, we are all used to communicating bad news to the family. In our culture, we practice non-disclosure model. We are used to, even if the patient comes with the family, we ask the patient to go out and then we talk to the family. That is what I'm saying is that we have to learn to communicate bad news to the patient. Of course, we talk to the family, we tell them everything, and we have to convince them. It is important to, allow the patient to know the bad news if the patient wants to know it. We are not advocating that everybody should know it. Only those who want to know it.
And this kind of situation, I mean, palliative care and CPN, it applies to non-cancer conditions also. Am I right? Or
Absolutely. There was I had a family who were colluding with me because their father had an interstitial lung disease. They didn't want the father to know that he had an incurable progressive lung pathology. So it is not about just cancer. You can have people colluding about motor neuron diseases, about dementias, about any kind of things. But yes, cancer perhaps carries some of the biggest stigma compared to other diseases.
yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
No, sir.
If patient asking about the time duration of his or her death,
Right.
what will be? Okay.
Yeah. So I'll then ask why. Why did you ask that? It's possible that the person has a rational reasoning for asking that question. For example, may say, my daughter's marriage is fixed for after 6 months. Should I prepone it? So in that kind of situation, the person says, how much time do I have? The person has a reason for asking. It's also possible that when I say, why did you ask that? The person may burst out in further tears and why did God do this to me? So that means that the person did not have a rational reason for asking, but had a need to ventilate more. So the same question, how much time do I have? The sentence is the same, but the reason why people ask could be different. So the most important thing from our side is we should ask, why did you say that? And then they will tell you why they said that. And if you have a solution, then you offer it. If you don't have a solution, you just keep quiet. But you heard, you listened.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Because when you listen, people are ventilating, and that is therapy in itself. Yes, Sunil.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. There is another question. If the patient is alone, will you communicate bad news?
Didn't understand.
If the patient is alone, would you communicate the bad news?
Uh, Obviously, I will, in the initial stages of my interview, would want to know about the background of the patient. What does he do? Who all he has in the family? Is he the primary decision maker? And all of that kind of thing. And if it seems like a reasonable thing to have an honest conversation with him, uh, probably I will go ahead with it. And any, if you have any comments to add, please feel free to do so, Sunil.
Yeah. As Biju told, I think it also depends on patients and situation, etc. And if the patient is asking directly, then of course we have to tell the patient right at that moment. We, I think we may not wait for the family, but if the patient is not asking and they tell us that okay, I will come with my wife or with somebody in the next visit and we will talk more, then we will talk at that time.
Agree.
Any more questions?
Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, please. You are.
Yeah. So from your experience in the Indian scenario, do most of the patients take the bad news well, or are there more agitated patients and bystanders? Like in abroad, usually those at the on the verge of hearing the bad news, they may take it negatively. They still buy some time and they'll adjust to the news. But here in Indian scenario, we have, I mean, it's a little bit different. So most of the cases are like that, or?
Right. So the answer to that is I make sure that I'm communicating bad news to only those people who are mentally prepared and who really want to know the bad news. They are prepared to hear the bad news. That is where the warning shot comes in. If it is something serious, would you still want to know? And once you give that warning shot, the person who looks into your eyes and says, "Yes, I want to know," is prepared to hear the bad news. I'm not going to give bad news to everybody, only to those people who are mentally prepared. And that is how I find out whether the person sitting in front of me is mentally prepared or not. That is the purpose of the warning shot. And even when you have somebody who is mentally prepared, I will not give all the information that I have. I will only give chunks of information and wait for the person to ask for more. Then I give another chunk of information. And I keep on providing chunks of information till either the whole story is over or the person had enough and is not asking for more information. So that is the point I will stop. So this is the way we will give information only to those who want in the optimum dose that they want. And as a result, we avoid any kind of damage to the patient, any kind of severe psychological damage. That does not mean people will not have an emotional reaction to the bad news. People sometimes get angry. Nobody told me about this. Till now, nobody told me anything about this. They were hiding things from me. So that is also fine. It is their right to get angry. It is their right to ventilate anger. Sometimes they may just cry a lot because they may say, "I always knew this. I always knew this." And then they will keep on crying. It is their right to cry. Sometimes they may just sit with a stunned silence, not speaking a word. That is also a kind of emotional ventilation. And I have had occasion where, when as a young, newly come into palliative medicine. In fact, I was doing my post graduation, and the first time I went alone to communicate bad news, it was elderly gentleman, and I sat there and I, did all this, giving the warning shot and the structured way. And by the end of it, I was fully drenched in sweat, and I was about to die myself. So this elderly gentleman patted me on the shoulder and he said, "Son, don't worry, I'm fine." You know, he gave me a lot of consolation after I told him his bad news. So it could be anything. There are people who you can't predict how somebody will react, but rest assured there will be some kind of reaction, and that is perfectly normal. How can you have a human being who will not react in some way to a bad news? Right? It's a life-changing experience. So that is fine. Only thing is you make sure that you select, and the patient selection has to be right. Only those who want to know, and only you give as much as the patient wants to.
Dr. Ramana, can you ask your question?
So how to deal with the ethical issues? It is the right of the patient to know the diagnosis. If there is some ethical issue over there, so how to deal with that situation?
Right. So primary four cardinal ethical principles that should determine
Yes, sir.
your decision making would be patient's autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice, the equitable use of resources. And if your decision is within this framework, you're unlikely that you'll be wrong. Now, the question is, are you in a position to implement your decision in an ethical manner? Because here, when we are talking about communicating bad news, it is not just an one-to-one relationship. It is not just you and the patient. The relationship also involves the family. So it is a negotiated form of how you are going to proceed with it. It's the patient's right, and hence the patient's autonomy says, the patient asks for it, you must tell. But you have to live in the real world. You, you can't forget where you are living, because after all, you have to deal with the family. And in the line of work that we are dealing with, we're dealing with mostly terminally ill patients or patients with incurable advanced medical conditions. Today or tomorrow the patient will go, then you have to deal with the family. So it's very important to have good relationship with the family. That is your protection, and it is about negotiate. I hope that works.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir.
Right.
Dr. Ramana, you had a question. I don't understand what is the occasion during which you asked that question. Can you ask that question again? I can see that he has written, then why people react after death. They beat up doctors.
I guess violence against doctors is a very, very complex subject. I don't know whether we can do justice to this topic in a few sentences, but I will just put up a couple of points that comes into my mind. I'm not prepared to do a presentation on violence against medical professionals. One thing, erosion of general values in society, that includes among us and among people around us. And that involves decreased tolerance for different viewpoints, decreased ability to listen. And I'm not just saying that decreased tolerance and decreased ability to listen is a problem only with general population. It is a problem with among the medical professionals also. So that's why I said there are general issues. We are part of the population. We are part of the society. So all the general sickness that afflicts society afflicts us also. The second thing is, as science has developed, we have not been able to communicate what science can do and what science cannot do. So people are under the impression that if you have enough money, enough technology, and then anything is possible. So they said, doctor, do everything, fix my dad. Not realizing, and even among us medical professionals, we don't realize majority of the diseases are incurable. Diabetes is incurable. Hypertension is incurable. You start from head to toe. Dementia, motor neuron diseases, interstitial lung diseases, COPD, CKD, CLD, Crohn's disease. Most of the diseases known to modern medicine are incurable. That you can control a little bit, but again, that control is not, perfect. That's why after 40 years, people still die of complications of diabetes, diabetic neuropathy, diabetic retinopathy, diabetic cardiomyopathy, all that kind of. So medical science is really advanced a lot, but what we have not progressed is how to communicate what are the advancement and what are the limitations. So patients and society's expectation and the reality, there is a mismatch. That contributes to it. So general value systems and miscommunication, expectation reality mismatch is there. Then our skills. As I said, if we are able to nip the fire in the bud, you have a small problem in the clinical environment, somebody getting angry because things got delayed, the person is waiting for a long time in the OP. If you just go out and sort this out, use your skill and nip the anger in the bud, a lot of flare-ups in our clinical environment will come down. That doesn't mean that we will not be faced with law and order problem, which we as medical professionals are not trained to deal. We wield a stethoscope. We do not wield a lathi. So it is important that to find out the difference between the things we can do and the things that we can't do, how we can have systems in place where adequate protection is provided. So as I said, it's a very complex topic. There are multiple etiologies of why violence is happening. Violence generally is happening against medical professionals happening. And there are multiple points of interventions that we can think of to reduce it. One thing I can say as a closing statement, the onus is on us to do things to protect us and our fellow medical professionals. We cannot wait for somebody to come and do something. And that is why I'm passionate about communication skills training program for our healthcare professionals. Because I know this is one, I'm not saying this is everything can be taken care of, but improving our communication skills is going to make us more secure and safe and happier.
Last question. So, just asking that question. Dr. Shilpa is asking, during COVID times, the family is away and patient is quickly deteriorating. How can we communicate that?
Oh, COVID has thrown up quite a lot of challenges. A lot of challenges, something that we have not been prepared for. Even otherwise, in the best of times, our preparation as far as communication has not been the best. But COVID has really thrown up a lot of challenges. Naturally, now we are using technology more and more to reach out. And the important thing is, even if COVID was not there, there were a lot of patients who were in the ICU with very anxious family members outside the ICU. And it is a recipe of disaster, because at any point of time, there are so many people who are so anxious and just about to burst into, extreme anxiety or extreme reaction because of fear and anxiety about what is happening inside. This happens because they don't know what is happening inside. You know what is happening inside, they don't know. And when you are in the dark, naturally you will be more scared. If you just sit in a dark room, you will be scared. And if you don't know what is happening, no information, your anxiety will improve. So forget about COVID. Even in non-COVID times, when we have patients in ICU and family waiting outside, I used to always recommend that you give periodic bulletins, periodic information bulletin to the family waiting outside, maybe an hourly bulletin. See, when you see a cricket match, it is no fun watching the cricket match on mute. You mute the voice, you can still see, you can still understand what is going on. But it is really satisfactory when you hear a running commentary along with what you're seeing visually. So that is where the satisfaction comes in, when you know what is going on in real time. So for the family members waiting outside, anxious, scared, don't know what is happening, if you could give an hourly bulletin, that does not mean the head of critical care has to come every 1 hour and talk to the family. You can have a team. See, communication skills is a team sport. You have to have a team which is equally trained, that they can stand in for each other. And the messaging has to be the same. So every hour, somebody can come out and call out each family, a patient, a family member of a patient, and give them what has been going on. And the information should be honest, that the patient is deteriorating, BP is going down, things are not looking very good. And if things are really bad, it is perhaps a better idea to have somebody senior person comes in and briefing the family. If things are stable or things are getting better, maybe the social worker can come and give the information. So it is just a mix and match of resources you have. But if you could give regular bulletins, that will take a lot of stress away for the family and for the healthcare professionals also. In times of COVID, we just have to use technology. We must use video chats or just phone and reach out to the family, give regular bulletin. Most important thing, I always say, communication skills is not one person's responsibility. Everybody in your ecosystem should be trained, right from the security person standing at the gate, right up to the COO or the MD or the executive director of the institution. Everybody should have training in communication skills, so that the experience of the patient and family at every place is positive.
Okay, thank you, Viju. I think we have to move on to the patient story. So which will be presented by Dr. Paramjit.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, you are.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Paramjit Bindra, working in Shri Guru Ramdas Institute of Medical Sciences and Research, Shri Amritsar, Punjab. Today, I'm presenting a case of 72 years female. She was the known case of carcinoma breast, left side. Presenting complaints. Patient presented with chief complaint of lump in the left breast associated with pain. She was feeling low and depressive since 4 months. She also complains about sleepless nights, bouts of anger, crying, irritability since 4 months. History of illness. History dates back to 6 months when patient noticed a lump in her left breast. Initially, it was painless, but over the months, it started increasing in size and become painful. After that, she started feeling low and depressed, which led to sleepless nights, bouts of anger, crying, and irritability. There is no history of bloody discharge from the left breast, no history of any weight loss, breathlessness, or headache, no history of diabetes, hypertension, tuberculosis, or asthma, achieved menopause at the age of 55 years, no family history of carcinoma breast. On examination, there was change in the skin pigmentation around the nipple area. Left breast examination revealed a lump measuring 3 by 2 centimeters, which was associated with pain. On examination, no ulceration or discharge from the left breast. Treatment. Patient was admitted in the surgical unit and taken up for radical mastectomy along with removal of lymph nodes. followed by adjuvant treatment and chemotherapy. She was put on the antibiotics, anti-anxiety, and tramadol for pain relief. For investigation part, we went for the CBC, LFT, KFT, serum electrolytes for the patient baseline values, chest X-ray to rule out any metastasis, viral markers to rule out hepatitis and HIV, ECG and echo for the baseline cardiac status as she was of higher age. Psychological aspects, married with children and grandchildren. Psychological aspect of pain. Even the patient was diagnosed 6 months back with carcinoma, but didn't seek any medical treatment because they thought disease was incurable and to avoid out-of-pocket expenditure. She was not willing to burden her family with financial expenses, fear of society, acceptance and isolation, loss of control leading to depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. Medication. Surgical excision of the lump was done, which will be followed by adjuvant treatment and chemotherapy. Tablet Supradyn was put on OD, tablet Pantodec OD, tablet Tramadol BD, clonazepam 0.25 BD, tablet Ibugesic 4 TDS, and injection Gramoseph BD was given to the patient. Main concern, communication gap with the consultant, which led to fear and anxiety in her, financial constraints, and lack of moral support. So, in the summary, patient noticed lump in the breast 6 months back, not associated with pain, and seek medical advice from Government Medical College, Amritsar, Punjab. After the diagnosis of carcinoma breast, she didn't proceed with any sort of treatment. A 72-year-old female patient who is known case of carcinoma breast reported in OPD of SDRD hospital with chief complaint of lump in the left breast with pain. She was feeling low and depressed. Patient was admitted in surgical unit and taken for radical mastectomy along with removal of lymph nodes, followed by adjuvant treatment and chemotherapy. A matter for major concern for me was that why didn't patient defer for 6 months, knowing that the disease was progressive and metastatic. Regular follow-up was done with the patient for financial help as we registered her with the Mukhyamantri Punjab Cancer Rahat Khoshna scheme, in which we provide 1.5 lakh to the cancer patient. And there on the discussion points, we have importance of communication when breaking bad news, because when the bad news was break out to the patient, I think proper counseling was not done and there was barrier. So that's why she delayed the treatment for 6 months, and then we have to go for the mastectomy and chemotherapy. Importance of seeking early treatment. Different aspects of pain needed to be addressed, like psychological, emotional, social, and spiritual. Importance of holistic approach in management of patient. Like earlier Sir said, while communicating the bad news, we can follow with the spikes protocol. And moreover, we always treat as a pathology, not as a whole body when patient comes to us and when we need to break the bad news. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Paramjot.
Thank you, sir.
So any comments from the participants? Anybody?
Sir, that patient was not, surgery was not done on the first hand once she reported to the hospital.
Ma'am, earlier she reported to Government Medical College. After 6 months, she came to us. And once she came to us, we planned the surgery and did the mastectomy.
For 6 months, she didn't go anywhere?
No, ma'am. She didn't went anywhere because she doesn't want to burden her family. And she thought, I will die in a few days. Why I have to burden my family?
Okay.
So the communication was not done in the proper manner, that it can be curable. There is nothing to worry. She was feeling that she will die within 2 or 3 days or like in a month. So why she has to take the treatment?
Okay, that's very nice. So you people are doing pre-treatment for her. She didn't know that.
Yes, ma'am. Now we have registered her with the, like in the Punjab state, we provide 1.5 lakh fund from the Mukhyamantri scheme. So we also supported her with the financial support, and we tied her with some NGOs who are providing her the finances like Can Support. We have also done the tie-up with them. And they even providing her with the home-based care also.
Was patient neglected by family member?
Yes, sir. Partially because they didn't took her to anywhere for the treatment in 6 months. And once she has started having pain, then only she reported in SDRD.
Okay.
Okay.
Are there palliative care treatment there in your hospital?
Ma'am, we are establishing a unit. We are on board to establish a unit.
Okay. Why didn't any people approach her like when she went for the initial treatment? Why didn't the people approach her for the emotional part of her?
Yes, ma'am. Initially, she went to Government Medical College. Once she came to us after 6 months, we get her proper counseling from the counselor, and we are following up with the financial part also, and with the emotional part and psychological part. Every aspect is covered here.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Unes? Do you have anything to say, Dr. Unes? Okay. No comments from me. Anybody else?
I'd just like to congratulate Dr. Paramjot. It was a very nice presentation.
Thank you, sir.
And very, covered everything. So it was really a good file to the topic that we were talking about. It was a very apt presentation, case presentation for today's topic. Thank you so much for it.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have any more comments? So communicating bad news is something which we have to do with some patients at least. You will face such situation. So we have to understand that we are not giving the bad news suddenly to the patient. We are doing it in a stepwise manner. So we should have time to speak to the patient. So otherwise, if you think that, okay, I have 10 minutes to speak to the doctor or to deliver the bad news to the patient, that is not the good time for communicating bad news. You should have some time with you, and the setting should be enough privacy. And sometimes patient might tell you, okay, I would like to bring my somebody. After that,
I would like to add one point, sir.
Yeah.
So actually now, earlier we used to read about the doctor-patient relationship, but now it has changed doctor-client relationship. So we need to build a rapport with the patient, and we need to spend some time with the patient. What I have seen in my clinical practice that we are spending a very less time with the patient, and we should at least spend at least 10 to 15 minutes with the patient when seeing even for the first time. And we should spend at least some time and build that doctor-patient relationship and not that doctor-client relationship. So that is my point of view. Thank you.
Do you have any comments?
No, I completely agree. It is, but only thing is that the more you get trained in communication skills, you'll realize that you are going to save on time, energy, and effort. That is the best part about being trained in communication skills. So yes, time is important. It's also about how best you utilize the time, and employing a lot of positive non-verbal body language skills will enhance whatever time you're spending, will enhance the satisfaction for the patient and their families.
Yeah.
Sir,
Thank you.
sir, I just want to ask you one thing. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
Hello.
yes.
Who's the question
Sir,
for?
this is from Dr. Girija Ramanan.
Is your question for me or to someone?
Yeah, I think you can also ask. You can also answer.
Yes, please.
So this is, suppose there's one case and this has been operated by a surgeon. And the surgeon doesn't communicate much and they are very brash sometimes. So how do you manage, like, do these doctors send the patient to the palliative people, or the palliative people come on their own and take this patient? This is what I want to know. Hello?
Sunil, you want to take that question?
I think I will ask Paramjot because how it is happened in this patient, Dr. Paramjot.
Sir, in this case, like we are establishing a unit in our hospital. So once we have some patient who goes for the surgery, they call the palliative care team member, or one of the person from the palliative care team visited the patient. Like we are 10 people in the group. So we are from different fields. Some is like into community medicine, some into palliative medicine, some from the psychiatry department, so surgery department. So one of the person from the team visited the patient, and then we go through all the specs, and then we come to the team and then decide what next we need to do. And in the coordination only, we go with the next procedure.
And Dr. Girija, was there a question behind your question?
No, my question was, why sometimes, we have seen that the surgeons, especially after they operate, they don't like to be disturbed very more like by the relatives, or, they are very brash sometimes. And so at that time, should the surgeon say, no, you go to the palliative, or the palliative should on their own come to the patient and communicate with them? That is what I wanted to know.
Ma'am, actually we have junior residents. So once patient get the surgery done, they communicate with us, and one of our team member visits the patient.
No, it is about your case, but I'm asking about as generally I'm asking. Means I'm asking
I think
Dr.
we need to
Biju.
work in a coordination. So yeah, it can be either way also. So if surgeon can't approach you, then palliative care team can track the cases and then they can reach.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
So generally, yeah.
Hello. Can I interrupt?
Dr. Kale. Yeah.
What she is the problem is very much because majority of the hospital, wherever surgery and everything is done, they are unaware of palliative care. Because I have been working for 45 years, people are not aware of the palliative care, and surgeons, especially, I'm a surgeon, especially are not bothered about this palliative treatment.
Do you know him?
Even today. Because palliative is an entirely different field. And
he's a surgeon.
So that's why we focus on like awareness and education. So
that's
regular education and awareness camps should be there for the even for the surgeons, consultants, and even for the patients visiting the hospital, even for their attendants. So we are also conducting like foundation courses for our consultants, and so regular awareness are done in our medical college for the palliative care.
That should happen everywhere. That should happen everywhere.
Yes, but then it's the management decision of every organization how they want to proceed actually.
This is now, it should be taken.
Yeah, but the question is,
I am promoting it now.
Yes, sir. Hello. So the question here is, in a multi-speciality hospital, how where the patients are not aware that there is a palliative care specialty and the service is available, should the consultant refer the patient to palliative, or the palliative care team goes around with the hospital and sees wherever there is requirement and does the job? That is the question, I think.
Okay, yeah, that was the question. I think Biju is working in a big hospital, and there are multiple specialties, and he will tell what he will do, or generally what has to be done.
All right. To begin with, the statement that I want to make is that the principles and practices of palliative care is something that is to be universally practiced, irrespective of your area of specialization. You can be a surgeon or a physician, doesn't matter. The principles and practices of palliative medicine is for everybody. Of course, there are specialized area where you need specialist palliative physicians to intervene. Having said that, the whole process of sensitizing to the concept of palliation has to start at the undergraduate level. By the time you are a neurosurgeon, it is a little far down the line. So at the MBBS level, the curriculum has to incorporate palliative care just like we incorporate preventive care. And as a result, over a period of time, we will have uniform awareness about the importance of relieving suffering. That is essentially what palliative care is all about. Meanwhile, we can try to influence decision makers, or like, for example, Dr. Kale is a surgeon and he's saying, I'm promoting palliative care because he saw that there is a benefit to it. So similarly, we will have to identify champions who has a voice and people listen to such champions, and through them, we can make palliative care more acceptable among our colleagues. Coming to my specific case, I am working in a quaternary hospital. We get referrals from almost about 20 odd departments. We are also running a charitable community-based program where the references are coming from the community. And like no doctor is referring to us. People are just self-aware and then they seek us out. Within the hospital, wherever is needed, the concerned specialist, because they're aware that I'm here, even though I'm working only part-time in my hospital, part-time I'm in the community, even then people are seeking out our services. And gradually over a period of time, we hope to expand. The only limitation that I have is I'm a single doctor, and as a result, there is only so much time I can dedicate myself to the in-hospital services. So that being the only limiting factor, I hope as over a period of time, I get more, more junior doctors to help me out. We may be able to expand, and the more you expand, the more visibility you will gain. And people will see the benefits of collaborating with palliative care. Palliative care is like sugar that you put in milk. You become part of the team. You are not a separate entity. When you're working with the oncologist, you become the oncology team. When you're working with the neurologist, you become part of the neurology team. When you're working with the geriatricians, you become part of the geriatric team. It doesn't matter. We blend in with any department, any services. Post-operative pain management, chronic pain management, end-of-life care, respiratory supportive care, oncology supportive care, geriatric supportive care, pediatric palliative care. We blend with any specialty. And most importantly, we are not stealing anybody's patient. That is the best part. So none of the specialty have to fear, even in a private hospital, they don't have to fear loss of income by associating with the palliative care physician. In fact, their patients will be happier, they'll be more comfortable, and we will be able to take away a lot of their headache, a lot of the stress that the specialists are going through is because of the problems that their patients are having. We take care of a lot of the distress of the patients. It makes the life of the consultant of that specialty easier. It's a win-win situation for everybody. It's just a matter of time that people realize it and come to know about it.
Sir, how?
I heard somewhere that palliative care is the best kept secret in modern medicine.
Sir, how is the community-based program conducted? I mean, how do we make awareness?
Right now, the hospital itself is funding as part of their CSR initiative.
Biju, we have a session on how to set up a palliative care unit at the end of this program. So we will talk more about this.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure it will be very beneficial to everybody.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think our time is up. So I hope the answer is clear. So if the patient is admitted under a surgeon has to refer the patient. But instead, all the specialties has to integrate the principles and practices of palliative care into their practice. That will be better. As palliative care people, we can't go, suppose there is a patient in the hospital who needs palliative care. We can't go and ask, do you need palliative care? Because it will not be right to encroach into the area of the primary physician who is treating the patient. Otherwise, the patient has to ask the treating doctor to refer the patient to the palliative care. We talked about the importance of communicating bad news. The setting has to be good. There should be privacy. We have to find out the insight of the patient. So if we know that sometimes the family member will tell you he don't know anything, but many a times the patient knows something about what is happening. So we need to fill in the gaps only. And when you give information, it should be very clear, and small sentences should be used. Medical jargon should be avoided, and there might be emotions which we need to handle. When you close the interview, there should be a plan of action with for follow-up also. So thank you, Dr. Biju, for giving a wonderful lecture on difficult communication issues. And also thank Dr. Paramjot for presenting a patient story which was apt for the session. And thank you all for your active participation.